This is a CEU program, so we want to run it like any other CEU program where we have listed out what the objectives of today are. We're going to look at what the core competencies are that have been defined for us by the Council on Social Work Education. We're going to look at those practice behaviors. Then we're going to talk about our own concentration and what that is and how that is defined and how we're going to look at recovery and resiliency. We would love for you to be able to walk out today and say, okay, these are foundation practice behaviors and these are advanced practice behaviors. So if there was an elevator quiz or a parking lot quiz, that would be it. And then we want to help you come up with some ways to think about reflecting with your students and what kinds of activities you could use to help them develop these competencies. And my teaching style is such that I want you to stop me if there are questions. I want this to be interactive as much as possible. I will, you won't have to speak into a microphone. I'll just repeat your questions so we can hear it on the video. So let me just introduce our program for those of you who are new to it or who haven't heard just about what's new in the MSW program at Westchester. Since we did this, I think just last Thursday, we now have 171 students who will be starting classes on Monday. And they will be taught by 16 of us, full-time and part-time faculty members. And they will be on 2 campuses. We are excited to roll out a campus in Philadelphia at 7th and Market. And that's where we have 23 students starting in our first ever part-time cohort down there. Dr. O'Neill, who is here, forgetting where Dr. O'Neill is going to be our lead teacher down there. And we just actually met with them. We had their orientation last night, and it was fantastic. And then here at this campus, at the Westchester campus, we run our full range of everything from advanced standing to part-time, full-time programs. When people ask about what is the master's program in social work at Westchester, what we want all of us to be able to do is to really explain what we mean by our concentration, and that's the point of today's program, is to talk about how at some programs, and maybe the MSW programs you went to, there were 3 tracks. Let's say there's a clinical track, right, an administrative track, and maybe a macro track. Well, we have 1 track, and that's called our concentration. Our concentration is events practice with individuals and families. And we're going to focus on 3 things throughout our curriculum: recovery, resilience, and capacity building. So I'm going to sort of take you through how we get there, right, using what our accreditors have put out for us. And then Dr. Bean is going to talk to you about how we pull that together in that second concentration year, so that when students graduate, they leave with a competent sense of how to do this work. Does that make sense? Okay. And before I just go to the next slide, I just want to echo what Julie Tennille said about how core this is. So I was a field liaison for the past 8 years, and I can say, and I know lots of you in the room, and I can see lots of familiar faces. Even some social workers who I myself have run into with my own family in the world. And it is so true that you're the ones that bring it alive for students, and that without you, we wouldn't be able to do this. And so we need, as much as possible, to be partnered so that we're all on the same page about what really it is to be a competent social worker today. So if there's anything that you can think of while we're doing this that would help students, right, really bring this home, I want you to feel welcome to share that. Part of this process is still in process. This concentration we've worked, I would say, for the past 5 months on, and there's still lots that we can do to make it even more relevant and accessible to you all. So we value that partnership very authentically. Okay, so field practicum, I don't know if you've heard this, but it's called the signature pedagogy, right? That's like the signature way that you're supposed to learn about social work. Right? This is not just supposed to be a classroom thing. This is not where you go into a lecture hall and you just read off a PowerPoint. Social work is meant to be practiced, learning by doing. We have 4 semesters of field for everyone who's not advanced standing, then you're only 2. And we run them concurrent with practice classes. There are some programs. Did anyone do a block program, or maybe you did your field in the summer while you were in your master's program? No one did that. So there are some programs where you do, I'm thinking like a Smith model, where you do your field all summer, right? And then you have classes during the year. For our students who come to Westchester, that probably wouldn't work. A majority of our students work along with their coursework. Some are working full-time, doing full-time classwork, and are potentially single parents or caregiving other family members. So we do them concurrently. It's 224 hours, sorry. It's really long. 224 hours per semester in the foundation year, right? And 280 in the concentration year. It kind of turns out to be 2 hours a week that first year to 2.5 days. I'm using language wrong. 2 days a week that first year, 2.5 days the second year. One of the things that I think is important about our program that distinguishes us is that we do allow students to have extended placements. Okay, what that means is if you're working full-time and you're taking classes, either part-time or full-time, it's very hard to commit to 16 hours or 2 weekdays in the field. And what if we sit here and think about who's going to be left, right, to carry out the social work services that need to be done if we just restrict social work education to people who have 2 daytime, 2 days of daytime hours available. So we've committed, from a social justice perspective, to finding ways to accommodate students who need other schedules. It is not possible, and is Lydia still in the room? But she can tell you that it's almost impossible to find weekend only or evening only placements. They just don't exist, right? Because most people with MSWs aren't doing weekend and evening only work. So what we've done is we've allowed them to extend their hours through winter break, maybe through even May. So they might do 12 hours a week with you, right? So a minimum amount, and just do it for a longer period of time. Does anyone know they have an extended placement student? Someone does, I'm sure. Okay, if you have an extended placement student, it just means that you all need to agree on which of the 12 hours they're coming in for. It can't be the 12 hours when no one else is in the agency, right? It needs to be when you think there's appropriate activities, maybe there's a staff meeting, or they can meet with clients or run the groups or whatever they're doing. Does that make sense? But you also have to help them keep track, right? It's extended, and we need to make sure they still meet those requirements, right? So that's one thing I think that's unique about our program. And so while they're there, whether it's for 12 or 20 hours a week, the idea is that they're going to both develop, right, these competencies that we've identified, and they're going to demonstrate them to you. Does that make sense? Like, somehow they need to demonstrate that they're competent when they leave to go out and practice in the world. And that can be hard to do because they're sometimes on their own. They might be doing work with an individual client, or you might not be in that group with them, or maybe they're going on a home visit. But within your supervisory capacity, which should be at least once a week, our hope is that you really can use some of what we're giving you today to get at whether or not they are meeting those competency expectations. Okay, so here's what we are doing. We are training students to be competent to practice with individuals and families using a strength-based collaborative approach, using assessment, engagement, and intervention and evaluation skills that are both research-informed and community-oriented. We teach our students never to see anyone just isolated from their community, whether it's their community geographically, right, where they live, how they access services, whether it's a community of identification, how they identify with other people, whether it's a community that they may not choose to belong to, right, we have involuntary communities, people who have been incarcerated, right? That's a community. People whose communities might be identified by their own ability, gender, race. And so to do all that, we focus, like I said, on these 3 things: resiliency, recovery, and capacity building, to build on this concentration, direct practice with individuals and families. Again, that's the parking-lot quiz, RRC. Okay, so when you think about assessing your students, one of the things that you're going to have to do is rate your students for us. So I see lots of returning field instructors, right? It's a Likert scale where you're actually going to have to rate them. That's not easy to do. Does anybody want to share what it's like to rate your students on a Likert scale where you're going to hand it into us? I see smiles, but nobody wants to share. Yep, Jackie?
This is my first time in Westchester.
Uh-huh.
I've had students interning with Widener, so I've had to do a scale, and I thought it was difficult because, especially with the semester to semester, because first semester, even if they're wonderful, you don't want to give them the highest because there's still a whole nother semester to learn. So explaining that to your intern that you're working with is you're doing a wonderful job, but nobody's perfect, and there's still more to learn next semester, and so I found that to be a little difficult.
So let me just pick up on what Jackie is saying, this idea that you're going to get pressure, and this comes a little bit later, but I'm going to jump in. You're going to get pressure from students to rate them high. You just are. It's a 1 through 5 scale where 3, 4, and 5 are, perfectly fine, but a 3 is like, oh, I got a 3? That can't be okay. And yet, what we really need to partner with you around is this, exactly what you're saying, there's growth, right? If they come in and you're giving them 5s, which is clearly exceptional, there's no room for growth. I mean, your first semester field, right? They will, I promise you, come back and say, they want it, I think there's a culture of grade inflation in the world, and I think we're just a product of that in some ways. We are your partners. We will partner with you to work with students who are struggling with the 3, the 4. We do not want you to feel like you're out there on your own. Because, and I'm skipping ahead, but I'll just jump in, we need you to help us gatekeep. What if you have a student who isn't appropriate for social work, right? Or who just isn't the one who you want your grandmother, right? I heard many people from hospice here, being the social worker in that hospice where it's your family member. Like, that's not okay. And if they can't or won't do it, then it's our job to identify that. I mean, competency really is this. This is competency. If you're below that, it doesn't work, right? If you're down here, that's just not enough. They need to meet those basic competencies, and that's what we're asking your help to make that happen. So this idea of competency-based assessment is not just in social work, right? We're looking at this across different professions, in education, but it's really something that we adopted in social work after 2008, after the Council on Social Work Education essentially mandated that this is how we go. We embrace this. We certainly think that competency is the way to go. And we're trying to use it in a way that makes sense, right? That this isn't just some abstract thing that you're going to get and have to fill out, but this means something to you and means something to our students for sure. There are 10 core competencies that a group of people worked for years at the national level to develop, okay? We don't have a say in how we assess our students. They have to meet these 10 core competencies. What we do have a say in is how that is operationalized, which is what Dr. Bean's going to talk to you about. Does that make sense about resiliency, recovery, and capacity building, how you carry that out? But these are set. I don't think most of us would argue with what's here. Right? I mean, of course, we want them to identify as a professional social worker. The question for you all is, what does that mean in your agency, in your organization? What does it mean, right, when you're working, I'm thinking of Danelle and Chris over there who are working in with kids. That's going to look so different than a hospital setting where Kara is. That's going to look so different than drug and alcohol. So it's part of your job to be that translator, right? Here, okay, it says you have to identify as a professional social worker. What does that look like? Actually, like, what do you wear? You know what, that's the first thing they want to know. The first thing they want to know, we have orientation on Friday, what should I wear? Right? They don't know how dressed up to be. Some of them don't know exactly how appropriate to be. We have to help them with that. They want to know if they should bring their lunch, right? Or if you guys eat lunch together, or they want to know everything. Do they tell them they're a student? You know, or do they just identify as a social worker? What's that mean? So it's your job to be that translator, right? Of here's what we expect and here's what that looks like in this setting. Number 2 is this idea that we work with an ethical code. We certainly train them on that. We do need you to reinforce that for them. Examples of what's an ethical judgment, what's a dilemma. Critical thinking, we need them to be able to communicate effectively. We focus highly in our program on diversity and difference and how they engage with that, especially in their own experiences, right? If you've ever taught a course like this where you teach about difference, oppression, privilege, and the aha moments are tremendous. Do not assume that our students understand, what we've learned in graduate school about difference, for sure, especially about their own experiences. I think the biggest aha moment is the week that we really talk about white privilege. Especially on this campus, we have a lot of, I would say, white middle-class students who have really never thought about their own race privilege before. And they do, and they have great insights. Number 5 is advanced human rights and social and economic justice. Research-informed and practice-informed research. This idea, number 7, about bringing in the environment. Number 8, policy practice. Number 9, responding to contexts. And then 10 is this idea of collaboratively engaging, assessing, intervening, and evaluating all these different types of groups. So again, these were put out by CSWE, the Council on Social Work Education. They're 10, and you will see them on all your evaluation forms because each of you will have to evaluate students along each core dimension. Okay, under those are practice behaviors. Does that make sense? So how do you identify, let's come up with how do you identify, for example, as a social worker? Well, what they've done is, the council, is come up with 41 different behaviors in that first field sequence. We call it first field because for some of you, you have second-year students who were here last year as part-timers. So when we call it first year, they say, but I'm a second year, but it's your first field. So that we call it first practicum or first field. 41 practice behaviors. Those are determined by CSWE. And those are listed on this document. And I think some of us in this room would argue about some of the language that is used. It's just the way it is. We are not on the committee to change that. If I were, I might suggest some language difference, but for now, that's what we use. In the second field, we developed our own 27. I want to make sure you guys understand that. That's part B of the parking lot quiz. So, if you have a first field student, those are the 41 behaviors that the council came up with. If you have an advanced student, you are going to be working with the 27 behaviors that we as a faculty developed around. What are the 3 things? Someone, resilience, recovery, capacity building. Awesome. Okay. Here's one thing I think that's going to help you. I think it's going to help you to know that we're going to be working on these in class, right? Just like you're going to work on them in the field. So it's not as if we're just saying, good luck with these 41, hope students can do that. This is what we're doing. All of our classes are tied to these, right? You're not just out there on your own hoping to teach the students how to do all this. We have our curriculum set up so that these flow through all of our courses. We reinforce them all the time. It's certainly helpful when they can ground it in something they're doing with you, but it's not only up to you. But one way that we can know if it's working, right, is at the end of this year, we're going to ask them if they can do these things, right? So if you look here, under the ethical principles, this is one of our favorites. This is 2D on this sheet. One of the expectations is to tolerate ambiguity in resolving ethical conflicts. We want students to say, I can tolerate ambiguity in resolving ethical conflicts. You're going to know that many of our students like it black and white. They want that cookbook, right? It is this way or that way. If my client says this, I definitely say that. Of course, that's not true. So as much as you're going to be working towards that, so are we. And really how we're going to know, again, that this is working is at the end of the year, we ask them, it's like a self-efficacy scale, right? To what extent can you do this? And they're going to say they strongly agree they can do it, they agree, they disagree, or they really disagree. And that's how we're going to know, right, if what we're doing and what you're doing is helping them. What was the other one I have here? When we assess them, we send those into our accrediting body to say, okay, look, our students, whatever it is, 85% of our students report that they can do these things. And that's a pretty typical standard for what we would hope. We would hope that most would agree or strongly agree that they can do it. And that's our job together over the next 2 semesters. So let's look at a couple examples here. this is the foundation behavior. You got one competency, and you have 6 practice behaviors. We probably could have come up with those as a group. They're not that deep and hard. The question is, how do we get students to think about this, right? How are you going to work with them to make sure that they understand what personal reflection means, right? For some, they might think that personal reflection is sharing about their own road through recovery, which may or may not be appropriate in your setting. Does that make sense? Their personal reflection might be telling you about their breakup last weekend when that is not salient to the core work you have to do. So don't assume, that we all agree on what personal reflection means. We are, of course, going to work on that in class, and you're going to work on that. But we have some ideas for you. And so if you look at this sheet, these are the reflection questions. And again, these are just ideas. We're looking for some insight. But we want you, in that supervisory period, to help students reflect on these things about who are social workers in this agency. Do you even use that title, right? Some of you may not. You might be the coordinator, you might be a therapist, you might be a program director, you might be a counselor. In the first field, we hope to have students reflect on their role, your role, the role of your department, whatever's going on, in ways that gives them insight into what social work is. Right? And then in practice class, what we talk about is, oh, that's what your social workers do, because mine do something totally different, right? They need to get the whole gist of what social work does by first learning what you guys do. So, for example, what kind of appearance is expected? So does anybody want to share what you would tell your intern about what you expect them to wear? What do you guys require your interns to wear? Yep, Kara?
Just business casual, no jeans, closed-toed shoes.
Closed-toed shoes, no jeans. Okay, so that's a hospital setting. Anyone else have something different? Yep.
Ours changes if they go to family court, and
Okay.
they have to wear a suit or the equivalent of a suit.
Great.
Closed-toed shoes, something very.
So a suit if they're going to court. Conservative, right. Yep.
Ours is very casual, flip-flops, you can wear jeans, as long as you don't have any stains, it's okay.
So you can wear flip-flops and jeans, great. So you can imagine that as practice teachers, we can't orient them to what you wear, because it just totally depends on where you are. And we always say it wouldn't be appropriate for us to tell you, right? You need to go find out. You need to go find out what it is that a social worker does in that environment. What does it look like when you go on a home visit, and how should you, dress in a certain community if you're going to court, which is different than if you're going to visit someone's bedside or you're going to play with them on the ground. So what we hope that you will do with these reflection questions is take them with you, today. Your students will go over them, your practice teachers, your field liaisons will help incorporate these as a way for you to start the conversation. How do we start the conversation? So for example, we feel very strongly about personal reflection. It's key. You'll notice that there's self-reflections that they have to write in everything they do. That is really hard for some students. Really hard. They don't want to tell you. They want to be just perfect master's level students who know everything. They don't want to tell you, that they are scared to death and they don't know what they're doing and they're really not sure how they're going to do all their work and get to field. And so if you can start to model that with them about what it was like for you in field or how you balance, it can help them, right? Talk to them about self-disclosure. Do you want them to self-disclose or not? I don't know. We talk about it in class a lot, but that really depends on your rules. Do they want to have an agency rule if they want to share specifically about self-disclosure? I'm thinking like Tracy, what do you guys tell students?
I've had situations where some students have had some personal issues, and there's not a policy that says that they can't self-disclose to us now.
What about with clients?
With patients, absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely
And you
not.
tell them up front, no self-disclosure with,
Right.
and you call them patients?
Exactly.
Okay.
With our patients, unless you are really skilled to do it in
Right.
a way
Right.
where some of our counselors are able to do it in a way where, you know, it's just enough to prove the point that they're trying to make with their patient. But if you don't, if you're not skilled, we've had situations where it's backfired. So
Yeah.
for students, we tell them do not self-disclose
Right.
because, you know, again, it can be used against them, so.
Absolutely. Yep.
I'm always told, be it students or just when I'm doing supervision, that it should be whatever's for the maximum benefit of the client. Not because you need to dump it that day because you can relate, you know. It's like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I totally get it, my boyfriend just, you know, nothing like that. And it also has to be something that you've worked through, that
Yeah.
you've processed, that
Right.
you've come out on the other side.
Can you all hear that down there? Okay.
So, yeah, so if you're still having the same battle and you haven't figured out how to get over it, then you're not really the best example. And for me personally, in terms of disclosure, I tend to, even if I don't directly disclose, I'll speak the language so that they know, they can recognize that I'm aware of where they're coming
Right.
from.
And that's the level at which you need to talk to students, right? What do we mean by reflection? How much disclosure? Who uses it and when? And because there are times when it works, right? This is the land of gray. I always tell students this isn't black and white. Social work is not black and white, and we play in the gray, and that's what makes it a fabulous thing to do and an awesome profession. But it can make it hard for those students who really want the clear cut. So how do I know if I'm using supervision effectively? What we do is we like to suggest that you all have 3 different types of supervision, right? Sometimes it's just administrative, right? Sometimes you're just getting through like how to do the paperwork and how to put it up on the board or how to write your notes. Sometimes you are doing more clinical work, right, around the clients that they're seeing and how you're going to work with them around cases. And other times you're just going to hear from them. It would be ideal if at least once a supervision period, which hopefully is once a week, you just put everything down and say, how's it going? Just how's it going, right? What's this experience like for you? If they start coming back in class and saying that they don't really get a word in edgewise because they just have to fill out all the forms and they don't have a chance to talk, right? We might have a field liaison give you a call and just suggest that the student needs to feel, right, that there's just some space to say, I just am totally freaked out. I can't believe I've got to go on that home visit and I'm nervous. So to the extent possible, see if we can create those spaces for them. They need those spaces. They know you're busy. They're worried about their grade for sure. And they're afraid that if they ask you something that may not seem like they know everything, that that's not going to reflect well in their grade. So you need to kind of invite that, right? How's it going? What's it like? What's social work? School like? I haven't been there. Tell me what are the papers, how are you surviving? And then you'll start to get more of the stuff. Anything else? Anyone want to chime in anything about that? Yep.
Can I just ask, does your grading work letter or pass fail?
Okay, so I'm going to show you that. Let me just speed up to that. Okay, so here, you don't have to grade. You don't have to assign a grade. We may consult you about a grade, but you can tell the students, I do not grade you. You evaluate their practice behaviors. That's all you do. We translate that into grades. Totally off it's just off your job description. You're going to do it twice a semester, both mid and final, okay? It's designed to be collaborative, where ideally you're not writing this at home at 2 in the morning and just emailing it to them. You're sitting across the desk and saying, here's why I think this is a 4, and here's why I think this is a 3, and this is where I would want to see you grow. It's a 5-point scale. So if you look here, right, 2 and 1 are where, okay, there's some work to be done. 3 is it's consistent, 4 is it's above, and 5 is it's clearly exceptional. There are times when we have all received rating forms that are all 5s. It's hard to work with a student who gets all 5s, right? Because they're not sure. Yep.
Can I ask why you want to evaluation twice per semester?
Why twice per semester? That's such a great question. Because we need to identify issues early so we can come up with a corrective action plan if needed. If we get someone who has 2s and 1s in that first half of the semester, we need to do something. Either it's not the right placement, the student is not appropriate for social work, or there's something else going on and we need to intervene. And I know most of you have worked with Lydia so far, but she tends to get involved when we have that kind of thing to sort out, like, what is it that's going on? What's nice is that all of our forms are fillable, so you'll get a Word document that's actually clickable. You can click the things and you can fill it on right there and print it out. It's designed to be as easy as possible. But I do, we're running a little bit late, so I just want to skip to this for 1 second. And this is what I was talking about earlier. It is our ethical responsibility to give students authentic feedback. It just is. We rely on you. I have had field instructors who say, she should not be in social work. This one should not. Well, then you got to give me a 2 or a 1, right? Because that's how it's going to help me convert that into a grade. That's going to help give the student the message that this wasn't a good either time in their life or a good choice in profession. Those are outliers. And probably no more than 1 or 2 of you, even in this room, is going to have that student who needs that kind of feedback. But if you hand in a form that has all 4s, right, how are we going to translate that into a grade that gives a student the idea that there were some issues? It's just hard. Tell your students you're not grading them, we are. So we take these and we really try and use the best knowledge we have to convert that into a grade. We always talk to students. So the mid-semester is really just a talking point for us. Great, everything's going fine. Once or twice a semester, Lydia is going to hear that there's someone who really isn't doing well, and then we get involved, and we will partner with you. We will not let you. We are not going to let you have a student who's not performing well, and tell you good luck. Hope that works out. It's not what we're going to do. And one of the things, this is my last slide before I pass this over. One of the things that we do for each core competency is make them write you some vignette. We make them write you a little story. How do they know they got it? What is their example of how they got it? Does that make sense? So that first one, that core competency of identifying as a professional social worker and using self-reflection, right? This is one that one of Michael's students wrote to him last year. In that setting, right, wherever the student was, how did the student know, right, when to use self-reflection and how to think about it? So we need them not just to see scores, Likert scale. We need them to really engage with you with this evaluation form, figure it out, show you that they also know they can do this work. And that's only at the end. That's not the mid-semester. Mid-semester is just the check boxes. It's really at the end that they do the practice vignettes of each semester. So I want to stick to our time, and I went fast through that. Any questions, other questions about things like why we have 2? In the first field, you'll have the 2, right, mid and final. You'll have 2 process recordings. And for everyone, you'll have a learning agreement. And the learning agreement also has a reflective piece where they have to write to you in 3 to 5 pages and tell you about themselves. Who are they? It's their first stab at being reflective. And it's always great to read those. I think you'll learn a lot. Okay, so great. So I'm going to turn this over so we can just start talking about our concentration and introduce Dr. Nadine Bean.
Hi. It's great to see so many familiar faces that are alum. It's just wonderful that you're field instructors now. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the concentration. I don't really care for the word concentration, but that's what we have from the Council on Social Work Education. It really is area of specialization. And as Paige said earlier, many programs have several different areas of specialization. Maybe substance use disorder treatment, maybe children and families, or child welfare, macro or community practice, policy or administration, and clinical. But we, being a relatively small program, we've really grown since when I was here in 98, 99, we graduated our first class in 99 of 16 students. And now we have 171. So anyway, so our one and only area of concentration is direct practice with individuals and families. And this is the definition we've come up with for our concentration. This is an approach to social work grounded in human rights and social justice. And you'll see those terms used throughout the advanced practice behaviors that we've developed specifically for our program. We hope that our graduates are trained to work with individuals and families using strengths-based, research-informed, and community-oriented assessment, intervention and evaluation skills to enhance resiliency, support recovery, and build capacity. So I'd like to go into those three main elements of our one and only area of concentration: recovery, resiliency, and capacity building. Many of you may not use these exact terms they may not be codified in your policies and procedures at your agency, the hospital you work at, the school, whatever setting. But I propose to you that by the end of this workshop, you will see that these terms are almost universally applicable, that they really align with the core values of the social work profession. And this is where it's at as far as research into assessment, intervention, and evaluation that is growing the evidence base for these frameworks, if you will. Okay? NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, really has led the way in the recovery model approach to working with individuals and families with mental health and or substance use disorder challenges. And they really are the organization that coined the term the recovery model. In 2011, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services, did I do the right thing? SAMHSA? No. Administration. It's part of the federal government's Department of Health and Human Services. Partnered with many in the behavioral health care community and many other partners. So consumers, persons in recovery, family members, advocates, policymakers, administrators, providers. Okay? And they developed the Recovery Support Strategic Initiative. So how do we, out there in the trenches, that may be working in behavioral health or other health areas, how do we support recovery? What does that look like? What is a good approach to activate and sustain recovery? And they developed this working definition of recovery, and I really, really like it. A process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. Strengths-based, right? Client-directed, client-centered. Starting where the client is and they self-determining as is possible. Right? And I really urge you to visit this website. Whoops, sorry. I didn't know it was that sensitive. Okay. But this website is incredible. You can download the PDF of this resource guide, or you can send for it for free in a hard copy. It's their working definition of recovery. I highly recommend it. All right, so let's go on a little bit and explore this. And I'd like to hear from those of you who are using this terminology in your agencies, whatever site you are at. And those of you who are not and are wondering about how does this fit into my education of this MSW Field student. All right, so SAMHSA says that there are 4 major dimensions of recovery, and they are health, home, purpose, and community. And again, aren't these incredibly aligned with our core social work values? A stable and safe place to live, meaningful life, community, person and environment. And as I said, you can go to the website here and just find incredible resources. And you might, for those of you whose settings don't actually use this terminology, you might go to this website and bring back information to your agency or hospital or school and talk about perhaps we should explore these dimensions of care and think about incorporating this language, because this language to me is so much more hopeful than the traditional medical model, pathological model. I don't know how many of you took a course in your MSW programs that was called abnormal psychology or mental pathology or something like that. Very medical model. We have moved our course hopefully into the 21st century, embracing these concepts that SAMHSA tells as part of the recovery model, and talk much more about recovery and building resiliency. And our course is entitled Mental Health and Illness. Then the guiding principles of recovery. I love these. Again, such more hopeful language than is often used when we're talking about mental health disorders. And by the way, recovery isn't just relegated to the area of mental health disorders and or substance use disorder assessment and treatment. So recovery emerges from hope. And what is the first thing we want to do as social workers working with individuals, families, communities? First, instill hope. I went to the most fantastic conference last summer in Washington, D.C. NASW National had their first national conference in many years. And it was, the central theme was about hope. And I see that SAMHSA really has embraced this as well. It's person-driven. It can occur across many pathways, many different pathways. Holistic, it's supported by peers and allies. It's supported through relationship and social networks. I tell my students in advanced practice classes that I teach over and over again, more than any technique that you may choose or framework you may utilize in your work. It's relationship, relationship, relationship that matters. In truly connecting with, engaging, collaborating with, and affecting meaningful change. It's culturally based and influenced. It involves individual, family, and community strengths and responsibility. And basically, it's based on respect. Are any of you, in any of your settings, utilizing the recovery model? Yes. Okay. Do you want to just say a couple of words about it? Is that relatively new, or has it been around for a while in your setting?
Well, I first started using it at another setting when I was working in inpatient drug and alcohol. And then started to hear more about it, but just the whole idea of focusing on the screens, of course, is used with that too. And really, I mean, a lot of people use the term in different ways as opposed to the model. They talk about the whole recovery process, and
Right.
sometimes it gets confusing in terms of doing it, but just recognizing that certain things like relapse could be a symptom as opposed to a bad behavior, and learning how to overcome that with support and, you know, but yeah, we definitely did talk about it, and everything that you've been saying, because I think everybody's trying to model accordingly, because basically, they can say it, but funding is based accordingly too, so.
Speaking of funding, I don't know how many of you are aware that SAMHSA also has a registry of evidence-based practices. So you can go to this registry and look at different approaches to work with individuals and families and communities, and look at the evidence base. They'll have resources for you, summarize the research that is out there, and so forth. So let's go on then to what is resilience. Can one build resiliency in individuals and families? You probably have used this word or heard this word used, and it's another area of behavioral health services and social services that has not been well defined until fairly recently. Basically, in a nutshell, resilience is the human capacity to face, overcome, be strengthened by, or even transformed by the adversities of life. You've probably heard the old adage, if it doesn't kill you, it'll make you stronger. Right? And I work a lot in the area of disaster relief services and disaster mental health services. And out of that area of practice, fairly recently has come a concept of post-traumatic growth. It doesn't mean that post-traumatic growth and resilience does not mean that you aren't impacted and impacted profoundly by some traumatic experiences, the adversities of life. It's just that the relative balance of protective factors and risk factors is such that you can come out the other side of traumatic experiences. You're always changed, sometimes for the better. So I like Meichenbaum's definition as well. And he is a general that has worked with military, veterans, service members, and military families for a long time. He says that it's a pattern of adaptation in the context of risk adversity. The ability to bounce back, or maybe even a better term is bounce forward from adversities. Bend but not break. Persevere in spite of ongoing stresses and even when things go awry. And again, this concept very much is in alignment with our strengths-based central value in social work. Resilience can develop over time across contexts. It's gradual. It's a developmental process. And just like in the last several years, I would say 5 to 10 years, we have brain imaging evidence that the brain undergoes, the structures in the brain, particularly in the limbic system or primitive brain, the hippocampus and the amygdala, are changed by trauma, whether it's one-time overwhelming trauma or cumulative trauma. The hippocampus shrinks, so the brain's capacity for processing traumatic memory goes awry. It's not, its capacity is diminished. Well, we now have brain imaging, neuroscientific evidence that working with individuals and families and communities to enhance resiliency and build capacity we can also see changes in the brain for the better that can mitigate or offset the changes that happen as a result of the experiencing adversities in life and trauma. And the most recent, brand new research is out of this laboratory for effective neuroscience at the University of Wisconsin. I have the website there. The bottom line is that we can teach things such as compassion and altruism, which are found to be really central features of resiliency. It can be taught and built from the very young to older adults, and it can mitigate the impact of traumatic experiences. So now we have evidence. The third major part of our concentration is capacity building. Capacity building, in a nutshell, is a key part of prevention. And again, SAMHSA is an incredible resource for you all. They have a strategic prevention framework from which they work. There's a whole section on their website about capacity building. Basically, it refers to the various types and levels of resources available to establish and maintain a community prevention system that can identify and respond to community and the individuals and families that make up the community's needs. So again, it's very aligned with social work values and that person and environment perspective. All right. Now I want to go to this handout that looks like this. And you can see that we have the definition of our concentration plan. On the first column are the core competencies, and those 10 core competencies remain the same at the foundation and concentration level. What's different is the advanced practice behaviors that are specific to our program that we want our graduates to be competent in by the time they have completed our program. All right. In the second column are possible reflection questions. So you can see I have the example of core competency 2.1.2, apply social work ethical principles to guide professional practice. These are possible questions that you might engage your student around in your discussions and supervision. And these also can be used in our classroom, our concurrent classroom courses. Hopefully, again, at the end of the concentration year, our graduating students also fill out a survey, a self-efficacy survey, to look at whether or not they do feel competent in these advanced practice behaviors. So the survey question might be, I am able to apply ethical reasoning to address dilemmas and work with individuals and families. All right. Any questions about these? I didn't ask Are any of your settings using the terms resilience or resiliency or resiliency building or capacity building? You are, okay. Okay, great. Even if you're not, though, I think you can see by these definitions and the advanced practice behaviors that they are widely applicable. Even in very short client contacts. As I mentioned, I do a lot of disaster mental health services work. Sometimes my contacts with people are very, very short and intense. But I can still approach them as, for instance, survivors, not victims of a disaster. Just that little change of mindset helps me to instill hope. And it's not that I don't recognize the powerful impact, the grief and loss issues. It's that I'm approaching them first as a survivor, not a victim. That can happen in medical emergency rooms. They can happen in hospice work. It can happen, of course, in children, youth, and families work, in whatever setting. I really believe this strongly.